This is Upton Bell, okay? I mean, this is Bob Lobel, but this is Upton Bell. Maybe some of you remember that he was the general manager of the New England Patriots. Maybe some of you remember that his father was Bert Bell, the first commissioner of the National Football League. All these things come back to mind, and I guess I really wanted to talk to you about the league today based upon what happened with Aaron Hernandez. And I could be wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's a big problem for the NFL. As popular as the NFL is, I think what happened with Hernandez is going to leave a mark.
Well, Bob, the first thing is it's kind of put a cap on all of the things that have been boiling up over the last 8 or 10 years. The NFL has had a lot of problems: drunken driving, all sorts of DUIs, beating up your wife. It's a league now that I think 50% of the players carry guns.
More than that.
What's happened. I'd say we'll say more than that. I've been trying to be conservative because they'll say prove it. But
people will say that's no different than general society.
And you know what? I want to debunk right off the top this stuff that's being thrown out by Peter King of Sports Illustrated and some of the other apologists for the NFL. When you talk about this situation and you say compared to the general population aren't multimillionaires at the age of 23. They're not people that have all of the privileges that come with playing in the NFL or any of the major league sports. So therefore, if you go back and look at the records, which I did, you know, there are a lot of young teenagers, young African-American men that have grown up in very, very bad circumstances, run with gangs, which we'll get into a little bit later on. They're the general population. What we do when we compare that general population, say, well, it's 4.1 the general population, it's only 1.1 in the NFL, that's crap. It is, I think, epidemic because of the people that come into the league. You're only talking about 12 to 1,400 players. 1.1 to, let's say, 2, that's a hell of a lot of people. And them to try and sweep that under the rug is wrong, because I look at it as an epidemic of what's happening to this game. On the surface, with all the other things that are happening, you say, well, you know, it's only on Sunday, blah, blah, blah. The underbelly of the league has got real problems.
Well, how did it get that way, and how's it going to be fixed?
First and foremost, it got that way because, and as much as I think he is one of the greatest coaches of all time, Bill Belichick and other people in the league permitted people to get into the league because they said, value added. If I can get Alfonso Denard in the 7th round, even though he slugged a cop, he's had all sorts of problems in college, I'm getting value added. If I can get Aaron Hernandez, who should have been a 1st or 2nd round choice, on the 4th round, even though people knew that he ran with gangs, even though people knew he was involved in shooting incidents, even people knew the problems that he had at Florida, real life problems, he was taken because it's value added. I'll even go to this point to a non-problem player to a degree, and that's Rob Gronkowski. In all the years I scouted, would never take a guy with a bad back. It never works out. He is a great player, but again, value added. Bad back, but look at all the upside. He hasn't really essentially played a full season in 2 years. So back to what you were saying, is that around the league, what happens, and I'll give you this quote from a scout that I trust at one of the top teams in the league. He said it used to be that when we went into scout players, and this included me before I became general manager, you spend 70% of the time, Bob, on scouting his skills, projecting him into the NFL. What type of player would it be? Does he have the intelligence to play? And maybe 20 or 30%. What is his family background? What type of person is he? Now this scout called me 3 weeks ago and he said, reverse it. We spend only 30% of the time on the player, what he will project into the NFL, how good is he as a player physically, and 70%, Does he have a record? Does he carry a gun? Has he beaten anybody up? Does he run with gangs? Does he have psychological problems? This is what it's spent on. The league won't tell you that, but I'm telling you straight from the horse's mouth, that's what every scout does today.
Did that Aaron Hernandez murder, alleged murder, happen, and this is a result of that?
Oh, I would be going too far out to say that it is a result, but certainly he was headed in a very, very violent way in his life.
I understand, but I'm saying is the league approach to talent as a result of the Hernandez situation?
I think the league is in denial. I think behind the scenes, the league is very, very worried because this is not going to get off the front pages soon. In fact, here's where, and I was talking to somebody in the league last week, and here's what they said. Their concern is, instead of being reported now on all the sports outlets, CNN has a story every day.
No, it's a news story.
Fox. Yeah, it's a big news story.
It's a crossover, but it is a big news story. Let me kind of shift a little bit and go to the owner, who says they say they were duped. My take on that is somewhere there was a conversation that Kraft said, I don't want to know. You got a player, don't bother telling me the risks involved. I don't want to know. Make him whole, make him good. So therefore, duped.
Plausible denial. Duped. There's no such thing as duped. A guy that smart is not duped. The caveat emptor is, did the coach tell him everything? Did the coach say, and I know this, and I think I called you and told you because we were doing a radio show at the time, the day that he was drafted, I called my friend who's a director of pro scouting, and he said, let me tell you the ways that I would not draft him. He said he won't be on our board and he won't be on a lot of other boards. And I said, well, why not? He said, because the first thing we don't like is we know he runs with gangs. He'll deny it, but he does run with gangs. The second thing is he has all sorts of guns go on, and if you can find on the internet him posing with guns and all sorts of things. He said, the other thing is that you have not heard this, but he's been involved in incidents and shootings at the University of Florida that have been covered up by our good friend Urban, I'll send you any con I can, Meyer. And this is what has happened. So would I think that he maybe would murder some guy or allegedly murder some guy? I don't know, but he was heading in that direction. He was playing with guns. He was running with gangs. He shot a guy in the face. I can guarantee you this, that double murder now that he's being investigated on in Boston, if the cops knew, and I'll get into how I knew 40 years ago what was going on with everybody, if the cops knew that Aaron Hernandez was in there and a couple of hours later 2 people were shot and killed. That's on the record, and the first thing they would do when I was general manager is they would call me and they'd say, Mr. Bell, one of your players was in this club last night. They got in a fist fight with another group, and 2 hours later, 2 of the people from that group were shot dead. We're not saying your guy did anything, but we want to let you know that. You don't think somebody called somebody there? And here's how I know. I'm going back 40 years, my first year as general manager. I made a deal with the ex-chief of police that I wanted to know everything that every player did, because there were a lot of players. The team I inherited.
Chief of police, what town?
Boston. His name was Ed McNamara. Look it up. He had just retired, and I said, I want you to connect with the league office because the league office had their security. Jack Donahue. I said, I've heard a lot of bad things. I had taken over Cleve Rush's team. I said, if they're bad guys, I want them out of here. And by bad guys, if they're running around with guns, if they're doing drugs or stuff like that, I'm cleaning house. So he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make a connection with the new chief of police. He said, we won't follow them, but we'll know if they're in clubs, what they're doing, everything else, and we'll try to give you a report every couple of weeks. I knew what every player was doing. Also, when we drafted players, I had a rule about players. Number one, if they were heavy into drugs, we aren't drafted. Number two, if they had a violent background, and I'm not talking about on the field, violent background, beating up women, doing things like that, I knew I was going to have trouble with them once they got there. Ironically now, I'm confessing on myself, the first thing I did when I got here is I traded for probably the greatest running back since Jimmy Brown, Dwayne Thomas, who I did find out had a drug problem. And I traded for him, got him here. The coach made a big deal out of it. I luckily voided the trade, sent him back, and got back a guy who ironically today, Carl Garrett, is in state prison for murder. He will never see the light of day. That's 40 years ago. So these people were around. Drug dealers, I walked across the field, the University of Massachusetts, and I knew this drug dealer was supplying some of the players. Bucko Kilroy, who you knew, the general manager, succeeded me, big guy, he said, look, I could get shot. So if I'm going to get shot, I'm pushing you in front of me first. And we walked across the field. I can't tell you how nervous I was. And I walked up to the drug dealer. I said, can you curse on this show?
No.
No. I said, get you know what off the field. I said, I don't want to ever see you around here. I know who you're supplying with. And this guy gave me a look. If looks would kill, this was it. You know, the next thing I figured, he'd pull a gun out and shoot me in front of 5,000 people watching practice.
There's some people now wish they had.
I know that. Okay. I know that.
I'm not one of them.
As long as I make it on the front of Rolling Stone.
Okay.
Anyway,
right.
So anyway.
Interesting.
That's 40 years ago. Since then, and I know this, that the NFL's security is so good and so tight in every city. If a guy sneezes, you know it. All right? So when you look at these different people and you see what's happened, I'll go back to Bob Kraft. I can't call him a liar because who knows? But I do go to Belichick, who has all these years, as great a coach as he is, has refused to answer any question. You know it's going to be a training camp, Bob. If the player's not here, I don't talk about it. But what about when he talked to Urban Meyer? Did Urban Meyer tell him how bad Hernandez was? And how about Spikes and the other guy? Bad people. And yet they were brought in here. He went away from his formula, which we all have a tendency to do, which is when you begin to not be as good as you used to be, you begin to take chances on people that you ordinarily wouldn't let in the front door. The question again is, did Kraft know this? Certainly. Albert Hainsworth, one of the biggest bums in the history of pro football. An out-and-out bum. You wouldn't want this guy in the front door. And Kraft is saying, you know what, since Albert has been here, what a sweetheart of a guy he's been. I'm rolling over, laughing, because I know it's not true. So, you reap as you sow, right? How many times have you and I talked about it?
I think that's true.
Look where they are now. But the bigger picture, and this is why I'm interested in doing this interview with you, is it's a cautionary tale. 1946, Bert Bell, on the night of the championship game, before the championship game, suspended 2 players, one for life, in a gambling scandal that was broken by the mayor and the cops in New York City. The very next day, he made a call to friends in the FBI, and he said, I want ex-FBI guys, identify them in every city, and I want to know what every player is doing in every city. If he goes into a bar, if he talks to a gambler, he does anything. Since that day, and he instituted that all the way to today, they're probably more competent than that stumbling, fumbling FBI now. So how do you say I was duped? How do you say? How do you know how, and people did, how he treated people around there? Was he great in practice? I know a lot of killers that are great in practice, but all the signs were there. So the question is, plausible, back to what you think, deniability, which is a possibility, or Belichick didn't, when they were drafting him, say, well, you know what, there were a few incidents, he did shoot a guy in the face and, beat some people up. Who cares about that, This is what we've got. But look at the league now. 31, 32 people arrested since the Super Bowl game. Again, they'll try to minimize it. But what is the element that's getting into your game? Are there more and more players coming from gangs? I'd say yes. Are there more and more players coming from gun culture? Absolutely. Are there more and more players surrounded by people that they shouldn't be surrounded by? Think about this. The average player, and here's where the league has really changed. 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, Grogan, people like that, Timmy Fox, people we know. Even in the 90s, if you came into the league, you had a decent salary, but a lot of guys worked in the off season. You know, you didn't have quite enough and you could get cut at any time. Today, these guys, even with the all adjusted for a rookie, these guys come in, they're millionaires immediately. They're 23 years old. If I was the same thing, I'd have a motorbike, I'd have a home, I'd have all this stuff. You're surrounded by a lot of people that don't necessarily have your good health in their mind. How could you not have a problem?
Here's my argument against it. It's not an argument. I'm saying it's always been there. The gun culture's always been there. The gang thing has always been there. The assault and battery things have always been there. What hasn't been there are smartphones and the social media of today. What hasn't been there.
Correct.
So Aaron Hernandez would not have called his buddy in Connecticut and told him to get his butt up here, because he would. It was part of the social culture. If he had no way of, in other words, a lot of this stuff wouldn't have happened because of the technology. I know it sounds stupid, but it's a simple thing like that that's like has a cause and effect.
No, Bob, and you know, it's funny because you've got me onto something else on this thing. You're absolutely right about part of it, but again, the element that I've seen over the years. Now I'm 50 years and counting, watching this league.
Yeah.
And I don't like what I see. But you're right, social media in particular. When the jury came back on the Trayvon Martin case, if you had seen the bona fide idiots in the NFL tweeting out, essentially saying, I hope this guy never walks another day in his life, I hope he's killed, and then they take it back on Twitter. Twitter is the most dangerous thing that has happened to an athlete in the NFL.
I'm just saying, the whole Aaron Hernandez, who's to say that it wouldn't have been somebody else somewhere, but he certainly wouldn't have had that contact and to be able to reach his fingers out to grab his posse and tell him to get and be part of this.
I don't disagree. Well, let's put it this way. It helps facilitate murder, killings, you name it.
No,
a
it
lot
makes
faster.
it makes everything work.
Easier.
Work.
Yeah.
Even the bad stuff makes the bad stuff work.
Absolutely. But the bad stuff, to a degree, was always there. But it graduated. You know, when I was running teams, the worst you would get is a guy was drunk, maybe a guy was doing some drugs, a guy was beating up his wife. We took it more seriously. But now, not only that, even with the power football has, I can remember when I started to see a change as we were coming in the 70s, and I was telling Billy Sullivan, listen, there's a whole other culture here. And he and those owners, they were nice people. They lived in a dream world. I said, listen, I come from an age group that understands you are now going to get a drug culture, but more importantly, you're going to get guns eventually and stuff like that. And he said, oh, Upton, he said, come on, these are really nice people. I said, they're not nice people. Gino Capoletti and Jimmy Nance and people like that, and even Plunkett, they're going to be gone. This is what you're getting. And that's how it progressed from those 70s up to now, where it's a very violent culture.
So as we begin, you know, the end of summer and the beginning of the NFL camp, how much of a cloud will be over the Patriots because, you know, sitting about 3 miles away in his solitary cell is probably one of your best players, not probably.
That cloud's not going away soon.
What does that mean? What is that? What kind of a?
Well, it is a constant reminder. Remember, they still have to deal, and a lot of people are going to judge them by what they do with Alfonso Dennard too, the guy that slugs the cop and stupid enough to go back to Nebraska and get himself in trouble again. People are calling for him to be thrown out the door, right or wrong. That cloud is always going to be there because wait till the trial comes. wait till the people see who he hung with and what's going on here. Oh my God. So, but the bad thing is, Bill Belichick, first day of training camp, everybody and their mother from the North American continent is going to be there to hear him say, he isn't here, we don't talk about it. But here's something I don't like. As great a coach as he is, he wouldn't work for me. Because I think somewhere along the line, and I work for some great Hall of Fame coaches, they would take responsibility. They would stand up there and say, look, I can't really talk about these things, but I can tell you so-and-so and so-and-so. You can't keep denying the truth. The first question I would ask if I was in the audience is, well, you drafted this guy. Did you know anything about him? I was asked this when I made a trade for Dwayne Thomas, and it didn't work out.
What do you want Belichick to say?
What do I want to say?
Yeah, how would that make it better?
I'm not trying to make it better.
Okay.
But he's the face of the franchise.
Clearly,
okay?
yeah.
I would probably say something like, he's not here. There's not a lot legally that we can talk about him. Could it have been a mistake? Yes, it could have been a mistake. But if you're in the National Football League, it's always a gamble with these people. People walk away and say, okay, at least Kraft took responsibility. But the guy who brought these people here is taking no responsibility, and he never has. That bothers me. As a coach, I'd hire him tomorrow. But the other part, I'm sorry, part of being a coach today, and the league tells you and instructs you, is you are the person that stands up there. Why do they have these damn press conferences? You know, you're there as the focal point, and you need to make some answers. And they don't.
One of the interesting and more bizarre surveys that came out was, let's take position by position and find out where the real felons hang out. Wide receiver, by far, was the most so-called arrested group. Next would be tight ends, and then linebackers or defensive backs. So, and the verdict, and the reason for that is what?
Well, first and foremost, quarterbacks are very rarely going to get arrested for anything. They're the leader. If they get arrested, they're in trouble. Maybe Sonny Jurgensen, Bobby Lane, going way back, drinking, getting in a brawl. The big offensive linemen are taught to obey, right? And they're down in the pits. Nobody knows them. Defensive linemen, maybe Vince Wilfork, same thing. They're down the pits. They're beating the hell out of each other. But the, hey man, who are they? They're the receivers. They're the dudes. Usually they are the dudes that get in trouble. The receivers and the defensive backs are. Occasionally, linebackers are more receivers now too. And we see with Gronkowski, God, I love the guy, but he's a village idiot the way he runs around and does things. He would never get away with that years ago. His own players would call him in and say, cut the crap out. We just lost the Super Bowl. Stop stripping to the waist and dancing up on the floor. There's nobody to control them. So, and occasionally a linebacker, yeah, I've known a lot of crazy they're crazy. They're a crazy group. But they're a crazy different group now. The Ray Nitschkes, the Mike Curtises, people like that, they got in fist fights in bars. These guys do a lot worse than that. That's the problem. But that's a really interesting survey, and it is right spot on.
So what does the commissioner do? How do they maybe not fix it, but at least control it?
Well, I think he ought to get on his helicopter and fly up to his new home in Trouts Neck, where my family lives, and have a cocktail party and just say, there's not much he can do. He'll talk about it. His only chance, and some of it's limited by the collective bargaining agreement, is to keep fining these people. Now, he fined 2 workers for Denver, and the only reason they never would have gotten fined in the past, but he's got to show the players, I'm going to fine the club members just as much as you. His only weapon is to fine these guys, suspend them. What other weapon does he have? They have a camp that, you know what, it's like Camp Feel Good. Every year they bring the rookies in. We never had to do this, by the way, but this tells you the problem. So they bring them into a place, and ironically, when Hernandez was getting arrested, this camp was going on. And they have person after person. Chris Herron's one of the people who came in this year. Tell them the evils of drugs, the evils of money, who to watch, how to do so and so. And guess what? 3/4 of them will walk out of there and do just the exact opposite. I just think the only way is, and you got to be careful, is to tell your scouts or your teams, and then it's collusion. If you see bad guys like this, we're not going to draft them.
Yeah, you say that, but you know your competition will. So it's you
But
know
you
what?
have to decide, Bob.
You want to be Father Flanagan's boys town.
You don't have to be that. I mean, there are teams that win. Packers win. They're okay. I mean, everybody complained about the Ravens. They're a bunch of thugs, but very few of those guys outside of Lewis really got in trouble. Take a look at it. They really didn't. They're thugs on the field, which is what you want them to be. But the Patriots weren't a bunch of thugs when they won their 3 championships, were they? You know, they had Corey Dillon at one year, and they got rid of him after that. Even, you know, you can win. And usually when you let a thug go, see, I let Denard go. Let the Jets pick him up. He'll be in trouble down there. That's the problem, is you weigh how good he is as a player versus how much trouble is he going to get you.
All right, very instructional, very informational. I really appreciate it, and nothing's solved, but the warning flags are
They're
up.
there. Think about this. When Churchill warned everybody before the Second World War, the Germans are coming, the Germans are coming, I'm warning them. I know it's a good time for everybody because everybody's making a lot of money out, but I warn the league. The storm warning is there.
Thank you for sharing that with us. All right.
My man.
He's Upton Bell. I'm Bob Lobel. Thank you.